When I was younger, a lot younger, my most vivid memories are of the storms. Thunder, lightning, gale force winds, dark skies lit with bright flashes, pelting raindrops thicker than tears, banging shutters, and tornadoes whipping debris across the flat landscape. During each and every storm, my father would put on his heavy leather coat, wide-brimmed hat, and waterproof boots, open the door, and walk outside. He would stand directly facing the wind, rain, and calamity ahead. There he would wait, regardless of wind or rain, until the storm passed. I have so many memories of him watching storms. When I asked my mother about it, she would just smile and say, my dad was a storm chaser, and watching them was his hobby. She would send me to bed, pull out some board games, or in some cases huddle me closer in the closet as we waited for it to pass. This continued for much of my life. There were storms almost weekly. Nearly every week, a new storm blew by. None of my friends seemed to know about these storms. Not all of them anyway. But I just thought that it was normal. Dad was a storm chaser after all. I was sure that he just caught them. Our lives were pretty normal, aside from the storms. I went to school. My parents attended PTA when they had to. My dad taught me sports, or tried to. Sometimes he would get frustrated when he worked on the family car, and sometimes he would try his hardest to be embarrassing in front of my friends. But you could always tell when a storm was coming. He would get this faraway look in his eyes, and his gaze would constantly drift away, always towards the direction of the approaching storm, whether or not it had been reported on the radio. When this happened, Mom would react immediately. She would pull all these storm shutters, bring in the laundry, cover the car. Anything that wasn't tied down would get tied down. And then she would sit down in front of my dad, take his hand, and ask, "How bad?" He would mumble a reply, and based on his reply, we would either break out some board games or hunker down in the closet. Dad would rise with the first thunder, put on his coat, boots, and hat. He would walk to the door, and then outside. On my 16th birthday, a storm came. I was so frustrated. I wanted to have my friends over, but Dad got that faraway look and we had to cancel our plans. I didn't understand it, and I threw a tantrum. Mom went through the routine, calm as you like. It was like everyone was ignoring me. So I thought, screw it, I'm going out. I had my hand in the doorknob when I felt a vice grip on my shoulder. I want to state now that my father had never been one for corporeal punishment. He tried spanking me once, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. My father was not a violent man. I need to make that clear because I did not even know my father could grip this hard. He said 2 words to me. They were pretty ordinary words, all things considered, but the circumstances, his vice grip, and the dead, emotionless tone of his voice made me uneasy. "Not yet," he said. With a single motion, he pulled me away from the door and stepped outside. Mom was right behind him closing the door. "It won't be so bad this time," she told me. Before she could offer the board games, I stormed off to my room. I was shaken, but I couldn't let my pride be stopped. I slammed the door behind me. It was probably 15 minutes before the storm seriously hit. It was pretty bad for a thunderstorm, but still, just a severe thunderstorm. You have to understand, a storm a week for 16 years means that I could identify most aspects of a storm based on what I could hear through my walls. It was the rattling of the shutters that gave me an idea. My shutters rattled like this when the wind was blowing directly towards them. That meant that Dad would be standing outside. I inched towards my window, trying to dodge the floorboards I knew would squeak. Carefully, I opened my window, sliding it up just enough to reach out of. I carefully unlatched my shutter, and I pushed it open. It was surprisingly dark out, the wind and rain and clouds blotting out what should have been afternoon sun. At the edge of the light from our house stood my father, coat blowing in the wind, hand on his hat. The wind and rain were deafening. It stung my face where it landed. And then lightning flashed. A complex, multi-branched arc that lit the sky. Then something else. I only saw it for a moment. A massive shadow in the distance. Fuck, it's a tornado, I thought to myself. Dad was never wrong about the severity of the storms. I was immediately worried. I wanted to tell Mom, but I didn't want her to know that I had been watching. Lightning flashed again. This time, the arc seemed to strike something. It arced in complex, circular patterns that almost looked like eyes. The two circles then flashed up and seemed to fix on me. At the same time, my dad threw up his hand and a gust of wind hit the shutters, throwing them closed and knocking me backward. My mom was in an instant later, looking for the first time in her life, afraid. She slammed the window closed, and without a word dragged me into the closet. I spent the rest of the increasingly violent storm listening to her quiet sobs, feeling her twitch with each one. If I strained, I could hear her whispering, "Not yet," almost audibly under her breath, over and over and over again. I didn't try to look again after that. The storms got worse though. Everyone seemed more violent than the last, so much so that my parents invested in metal storm shutters and even a storm cellar, something we didn't even consider in the past. Despite this increased activity, nothing new really happened until my 18th birthday. That day, there were 2 coats, 2 hats, and 2 pairs of boots on the coat rack at home. I looked for the visitor, but my father was just sitting at the table, staring off into the distance again. I started to leave the kitchen to find Mom, but my dad called out. "Wait. Please, sit down," he said. It was the first time my father had directly spoken to me on a storm day. Naturally, I sat. "Today," he said calmly. I should have been confused, could have asked questions, but I knew. Ever since that day 2 years ago, I knew that "not yet" was temporary. So I sat. At first, time seemed to crawl by and my eyes wandered, until they found something. Whenever I stared at the direction my father stared, it wasn't that I saw something, not necessarily. It's like I felt something deep in my bones, a kind of rumble, like thunder you can't hear. My father and I sat, staring into the distance. As soon as the first thunder sounded, he rose. I was only a moment behind him. I immediately understood the extra clothes were mine. We donned our boots, long coat, and hat in silence. I hesitated at the door. "Wait, Mom," I started. "She's in the cellar. This isn't for her," he replied, before throwing open the door to the sound of 1,000 steam trains. I knew from experience that it was a tornado, and a big one by the judge of it. There wasn't rain, but the wind was vicious. No, this wasn't a storm for rain. The wind would keep the rain from hitting the ground, and it would fall as hail elsewhere. I followed my father outside, hand firmly on my hat, its stiff, wide brim angled downwards to protect my eyes from dust and wind. We strode directly out, stopping about 15 paces from the front door. My father stood, and I stood at his side. The steam trains roared viciously, but never came any closer. It was nearly pitch black outside. Visibility was cut off like a knife at the edge of our porch light, and we both stood with our toes at the line. Wind whipped us from every direction. Trains roared their ghostly cries, and for the first time I noticed that it wasn't coming from one direction, but every direction. Our family has watched storms for as long as anyone can remember. My father's calm voice reached me, despite the wind filling my ears and the echoing wails rattling my bones. We don't remember when it started, and why it is not something that can simply be explained. He went quiet. Lightless thunder rumbled in the distance. It can only be shown. Following his words, he brought his hands together in a mighty clap. Directly ahead in the sky, a multi-branched lightning bolt crept slower than it should through the clouds. What I saw, I still don't know how to explain. It was like a web covering the whole sky in a three-dimensional mesh. Cells of dead air with thick black borders made of violent cyclones, all interconnected in a mind-numbing fractaline latticework. This mesmerizing net of lightning and wind and rain wasn't what held my gaze, however. It was the thing beyond the lattice. It stalked, eyes blacker than the surrounding darkness, a form indescribably twisted upon itself, folded into itself, and among itself in ways that twisted my very gut. It was a shape that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. But there it was, stalking the outside of the cyclone barricade. And that's exactly what it was. A barricade. Bars of the most violent forces our planet has to offer, woven together in such a way that this thing couldn't squeeze through. It locked eyes with me. Visually, there was no way to discern where it looked, but you could feel its gaze. Feel it like it was physically caressing each individual atom of your body. Under its gaze, you too became uniquely aware of every single particle of yourself. Like the very act of being observed was unraveling you, laying you to bare and naked before its eyes. It was then that I found something inside myself. A spark, an ember, whatever you want to call it. Under this thing's unwavering observation, I learned what it truly meant to stand sentinel at the gates of reality, to maintain the barricade, to watch for cracks, to watch for weakness, to shore up the walls with mortar when required, and I understood. When I was younger, my father used to watch storms. Now, it is my turn. I couldn't wait to get home. It had been a long, exhausting day, but on the bright side, all of my hard work would be worth it. After years of research and effort, it would soon be finished, and I would be home to finally relax, maybe have a nice dinner, and the precious love of my life. It had been a rough couple of years for us, but through all the hardships that we endured, it would all be fine after tonight. I had always loved her. I had always been willing to do anything for her. She was very precious to me after all. The rain was coming down pretty hard. So hard that all I could hear were the sounds of the heavy raindrops slamming and splashing onto the ground. It always sucks walking in the rain, but she was right there too, and that made it worth it. Granted, she was a pretty fast walker. I would swear if I had stopped for a second, she would walk off and leave me behind. She always quick and to the point. No time for distractions or second thoughts. Just point A to point B. It had only been a couple of years since I had first laid eyes on her, but she had been a very important part of my life since day one. At this point, I knew everything there was to know about her. Heck, I would go so far as to say that I know better than anyone, maybe even herself. Finally, we made it to the house. I was so happy to get out of the rain. I swear I felt like I was soaked down to the bone. Quickly, she unlocked the door and hurried in, escaping the storm, and I quickly followed behind. But before I put my hand on the doorknob, it occurred to me that I had forgotten something. Crap. I had always hated it when I was forgetful, especially when it came to my son's birthday. These were a rough couple of years of late nights and hard work, but that was no excuse. I made my way back to the office and I searched my desk for it. Aha, there it was. My son's birthday gift. Now I had to make my way back to the house. I should probably invest in a new car. Finally, I made it back to the house, unlocked the door, and I stepped inside. The house was dark and quiet. She must have gone to bed already. I always hated having to sneak around to not wake up the whole house. I swear sounds are magnified tenfold when you're trying to be quiet. I hung my coat on the rack and slowly made my way upstairs. Each creak on the steps made my heart race. I knew that if I woke her up, she would probably kick my butt, and it had been far too long of a night to have to deal with that. Finally, making my way to the top step, I walked slowly and quietly. First was the kids' room. I peeked inside to check on them. Still fast asleep. Good. Such precious angels. I continued walking until I got to the master bedroom. As I thought, she was already fast asleep. Slowly unzipping my hoodie and laying it gently on the floor, I walked up to her and I stared at her sleeping face. She was an incredibly beautiful woman, no doubt about that. I sighed and I unsheathed my knife, taking a deep breath. It was too bad that she was so hideously ugly on the inside. Quickly and effectively, I covered her mouth with one hand and plunged the knife deep into her temple with the other. Her eyes opened wide with confusion, pain, terror, and eventually, emptiness. She would have appreciated this method. No time for distractions. No time to mess around with torture or suffering. No showing her a photo of my son. No asking if she knew what his name was, nor how old he was when she murdered him. No asking what was so important that she was speeding so fast that day, running that red light, and slamming right into me as I carried my son in my arms, injuring me badly, but killing my boy on impact. No asking why she had fled the scene, leaving me to die as well. No, there was no time for any of that. I had spent too much time with this obsession. I had spent numerous time and resources finding her, learning everything I could about her, planning for this very moment. It was my son's birthday. I had this all planned out exactly how I needed it to go, and there was no time for deviations. One quick thrust and it was all over. I slowly exhaled in relief as I slid the blade from her head, staring at her cold, dead eyes. Quickly but quietly, I made my way out of the house and I headed home, making sure that there was no one around to see me. It had been a long night. Heck, it had been a long couple of years since Carter died. I was finally home though, and it felt so good to be here. Once again, I removed my coat and I placed it on the rack. I made my way upstairs and I looked into Carter's room, vacant yet untouched for the last 2 years. Finally, I made it to my bedroom. Meredith laying peacefully asleep. I truly do love her, and have always been willing to do anything for her. As hard as Carter's passing had been on me, Meredith had taken it especially hard. Things got very rough for us between the fighting, the blaming, and these separations. Things would be better now. We could start the process of moving forward. We had to. After a long hot shower, I climbed into bed and I held her close. She slowly opened her eyes and, staring into mine, asked if it was done. I nodded in confirmation, and for the first time in 2 long years, I saw a genuinely beautiful smile. There were only a few more hours until sunrise, so I got the little bit of sleep that I could before waking up to head to the cemetery. It was Carter's birthday after all, and we had to take his gift to him. At his grave, I gently laid down the small toy dinosaur that I had gotten from my office near his headstone. He had always loved dinosaurs, and they were precious to him, as he was precious to me. A tear fell from my eye, and I stood, telling him once more that I loved him. Hand in hand, Meredith and I made our way back home, to move forward. Home at last.